scripture for the message is in Mark chapter 12, verses 38 through 44. Now in Jesus' teaching, he said, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces, have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' offering or houses, and for pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Then he sat down opposite the treasury, and he watched people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came. She put in 2 small copper coins, which makes a penny. And he called his disciples to him, and he said to them, "Truly I say to you, this widow has put in more than all of those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. There's a lot of preaching that's going on, and it seems to make the news a lot about that tells the hearers what we get or should get out of Christianity. For some, it's what we get out of our personal lives and the spiritual growth maybe that we should be getting. For others, it's in our congregations, or it's in our community, or even in our country or the world, where we're told there's certain things we should get. And if we're not getting what we think we should have in any of those areas, we're told to complain, and we're told to fight to get what we think we deserve. The problem with all of this is the gospel is not about getting, it's about giving. Jesus said he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give himself as a ransom for many. His giving we call grace. It's not something we deserve or that we should get, much less that we should fight to get. The true followers of Jesus are those who give themselves, not those who are trying to get for themselves. This is what our text, I think, is lifting up for us here, is Jesus is pointing out a contrast between the scribes and one poor widow. Let's look at the scribes first. They're interpreters of the law of Moses, and so they're considered by everybody else to be the most religious, the finest, most moral people of their day. And yet Jesus tells his disciples, be on watch concerning them. Their religion leads to the honors that they get. So the long, fine robes, greetings in the marketplaces, best seats in the synagogue, the best places of honor when a big feast occurs. Their religion is all about what they get from others. And so that religion is hollow in God's eyes. Their long prayers, Jesus says, it's pretense. It's trickery. It doesn't amount to anything. They take away from the poor, even poor widows. These ones will receive more abundant judgment or condemnation, Jesus says. Now let's see the widow in contrast. Jesus is seated across from the treasury in the temple compounds, and he sees many people putting coins in, and even rich men putting in much, it says. And yet one poor widow comes, and she puts in 2 of the smallest coins that they used back at that time. And Jesus gets the disciples' attention, and he says, this poor woman, this poor widow, put in more than all of those who put money in. Not just more than one particular person, but more than all of them, including the rich men that put lots of coins in. This poor widow put in more than all of them. Now, if we're only thinking on the level of the amount of money, that statement wouldn't be true. So what is Jesus talking about here? He goes on to say all the others are putting in from their abundance. They're not really giving, they're getting. They're getting prestige. They're getting respect. They're getting honor by people seeing them put in large gifts and making very loud noise. These were all coins in those days. Making loud noise, giving those gifts. In contrast, the widow was putting in from her lack, or from her poverty in the other translation. So she did this, where she put in, Jesus says, was everything, as much as she had to live on. You know, if Jesus hadn't been there, no one would have noticed her. No one would have seen her putting in the 2 small coins. They wouldn't pay any attention to that. It was a small gift. So this widow is getting nothing from this act of giving. It's a pure giving. She's giving all of her means of living to God. And Jesus, being sinless, could recognize that, and he lifts that up in contrast to what the scribes were doing. Everyone thought the scribes were so religious. They talked about God a lot all the time, and they said they knew the scriptures and they could do all sorts of stuff, but their religion was empty in God's eyes. It was all about getting for themselves. And Jesus says that's not religion. It's like what the widow was doing. That he himself, he says in another passage, came not to be served, but to serve and to give himself as a ransom for many. And so Jesus' true followers are going to be known by their giving, not what they're getting for themselves. They will be like this widow. The Apostle John said in chapter 1 that we received grace in correspondence to grace. We're able to truly be used as instruments by God to give grace to other people, like this widow is doing, because God first graced or gave to us. He gave himself for us. So because God gives himself to us in Jesus, we're able to give as well, and that's the mark of a true Christian. So there's a lot of false preaching today when it's talking about getting, whether that's personal spiritual growth that we are entitled to, or whether it's positions in congregations we think we deserve, or whether it's earning respect in our communities, or whether it's protecting our way of living in the country or in the world. All of these things are empty in God's eyes. They're not gospel. It's all about getting, and it's not true giving. It's not grace, as Jesus first graced us. Let's hear how Laurie Davies experienced a deeper religion because she saw someone else, another follower of Jesus, who was showing grace through her life. She said she was at a family gathering, so I could picture one of the big holidays, and she didn't say which one, but she looked over and saw her mother-in-law, Lucy, said, looking helplessly at her fork. Lucy looked down at the tender roast beef, and then she sighed heavily and turned her head. Laurie went over and started slicing the meat up, and she held a small piece to her lips. Lucy looked intently at her and then accepted the bite. Then she said, I know I should know who you are. Thank you for being kind to me. I'm Laurie, she said. I'm married to your youngest son, Greg, as she gave her another bite of food. You're the reason I know Jesus. Really? Lucy said, and a big smile went over her face as she said, Jesus. In her mind, Laurie started reflecting on Lucy's story, that long before she was part of the family. That she was born premature way back in 1927, which would have been very dangerous to be premature birth back then, to some poor coal miners. They had to wrap her up and kept her in a drawer that was near a fireplace in order to keep her warm enough just to be able to survive. And the family said maybe that's why she was a fighter so much all of her life, that it seemed like from day one she had to fight just to be able to live. And yet that fighting made her restless. She had a fiery temper. She sometimes turned that temper on her own family. This didn't mean she wasn't religious. She was trying to follow religious rules, and she fought to try to get better at keeping those rules. But all of that led to, in her life, was impatience. It made her overreactive to things, and it led to judgment and even rage. She could later say, when she was looking back at this time of her life, I was fighting for something I couldn't win: grace. It all changed when a pastor's sermon one Sunday started to sound like foreign language to her, even though it was in English. It was talking about the grace of a generous God. And that didn't fit with the view of God that she had been raised with. Laurie said she shifted her focus from what she needed to do for God to what He had done for her. She joined a Bible study to learn more about this God, and she started to begin to serve others. Laurie's husband, Greg, said the change was so drastic that Lucy went from rage control to self-control, from fearful to hopeful, from judgmental to understanding. Greg was 18 when this change occurred in his mom, and he wanted this change for himself too. So he started to give his own life to be part of Jesus' work. When Greg finally met Laurie, she said that she had been just the facts journalist. She wondered about God from time to time, but no one had ever been able to prove to her that God even existed, much less cared about her. Said it was at brunch one Sunday after church that Greg had said he knew God was real. My mom had rage, and then she didn't anymore. It just stopped. Jesus calmed her spirit inside of her just like that. Laurie said he had this intense look on his face that only one other day since then did she remember that intense look, and that was on their wedding day. Lucy's story was the key that turned my own lock, Laurie said. I told God I didn't want to fight him anymore. I accepted the mystery of being saved by grace through faith. Now here she was feeding this mother-in-law, an act of giving. She wished that she would be able to tell her so that she could understand that I finally see how beautiful it is to come to God with my failures and watch him redeem rather than rebuke them. Through God working through Lucy, Laurie came to learn of grace, of giving, of Jesus' love. So much preaching today is about what we should get for ourselves, from our congregations, our community, our country, yet none of this is gospel. The gospel is about giving, not about getting for ourselves. As John said, we receive grace in correspondence to grace. So let us be vigilant against those proponents like the scribes in Jesus' day of that empty religion of getting for ourselves. And like the widow, may our religion be true giving. For Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and to give himself for each and every